former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Biden's early days, Breaking Bad? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm Tim Donner, senior political analyst at LibertyNation.com. Joe Biden works through the first 10 days of his presidency, issuing a boatload of executive decrees while his party prepares to put former President Trump on trial, tries to expel 2 senators who supported Trump. Big media provides the expected fawning coverage of the new president, and big tech and corporate America expand their censorship of conservatives. We'll examine what Biden has done so far and how the public is reacting, and analyze just how hard will be Biden's burden, erasing Trump's legacy. We'll be joined by LibertyNation.com managing editor Mark Angelides and by legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza for Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. It's becoming increasingly difficult to harmonize the words of Joe Biden with his actions and those of his party in the first 10 days of his nascent presidency. He has so far essentially governed by decree, executing some 36 executive orders, most of them reversing what the left considers the most egregious Trump policies, all delivered in carefully pre-scripted appearances by the new president, always on teleprompter. This week, Biden designated each day to one particular issue, from climate change, featuring the return of former Secretary of State John Kerry as special presidential envoy for climate, to the most explosive topic of all, racial justice.
The moment had arrived as a nation where we face deep racial inequities in America and systemic racism that has plagued our nation for far, far too long. I said that over the course of the past year that the blinders have been taken off the nation, the American people. What many Americans didn't see or had simply refused to see couldn't be ignored any longer. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life opened the eyes of millions of Americans and millions of people around all over the world. It was the knee on the neck of justice, and it wouldn't be forgotten.
But while the president was trying to attract the nation's attention, together with the compliant media, on those kind of sermonettes, so to speak, attempting to lower the temperature of the nation, his party was headed in the opposite direction. Good cop, bad cop. Impeaching Trump for a second time as he was about to leave the White House, and the Senate will put him on trial as a private citizen starting February 9th. Illinois Democrat Senator Tammy Duckworth explains the Democrats' logic for impeaching a president who's no longer president.
Every official who has been barred from holding future office was out of office. And so we have historical precedents that shows that it is constitutional to have a trial that will bar somebody from holding office in the future, because we've done it in our nation's past. So it's clear that it is constitutional.
But Senator Rand Paul made an impassioned speech on the Senate floor, arguing the opposite.
In a few minutes, I will insist on a vote to affirm that this proceeding we are about to enter is unconstitutional, that impeachment of a private citizen is illegal and essentially a bill of attainder, and that no sense of fairness or due process would allow the judge in the proceeding to be a partisan Democrat already on favor of the impeachment. A sham, this is, a travesty, a dark blot on the history of our country. Shame. Shame on these angry, unhinged partisans who are putting forth this sham impeachment, deranged by their hatred of the former president.
What's a bill of attainder, you might ask? Well, it's essentially singling out a person or group of people and declaring him or them guilty of some crime and punishing them after the fact. It's specifically prohibited in the Constitution because it amounts to nothing less than pure retribution. But attempting to keep Trump from ever being able to run again is just part of the left's plan. They want to expel two of Trump's most ardent supporters in the Senate for daring to ask for an audit of the election. Leftist heartthrob AOC articulated the progressive perspective with her friend Chris Cuomo on CNN.
Let's bring up a vote to expel Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley from the Senate.
You think they should be out?
Because if we've got time on our hands, then we should be actually bringing justice to the members of Congress and the members of the Senate who also help support this insurrection.
You think they should be out?
Let's not. They absolutely.
But Senator Hawley of Missouri has shown no propensity for backing down, dismissing the move to remove him and saying on Fox News that conservatives being attacked and censored by an unholy trinity must not bow down to the mob.
Now we've got big tech and the big corporations in league with the left. And what they're basically saying is, listen, if you don't hold the right opinions, then you're not going to be able to be on social media. You're not going to be able to get a job, maybe. You're not going to be able to communicate. If you have a small business, you're going to get boycotted. It is an unbelievable attempt by big business, big tech, and the left to try to censor all dissent, to try to shut down all opposition, to try to silence half of America. And while the Democrats talk about unity in Washington, they don't want unity. What they want is total control. And these big corporations are right there with them trying to achieve it. We've got to stand up and say, we will not bow down to the mob.
Fighting words, to be sure, but Hawley and conservatives are fighting an uphill battle, with big tech extending its campaign of conservative censorship and the media providing the expected almost 100% positive coverage of the new president, and upping the ante with chilling statements like this on MSNBC from former Republican strategist and never Trumper Nicole Wallace. Listen to this.
It would be my policy that a Republican must assert the truth before they're allowed to share any other views.
Translation: voice your acceptance of the sanctioned position, what she calls the truth, or you will be silenced in America. But threats to and from the new administration are not just domestic. As expected, China has started flexing its muscles again now that Trump is gone and Biden heads things back in the same direction as the 50 years before Trump. The Chinese recently placed sanctions on those officials responsible for Trump's audacious approach to them, foremost among them former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
This is part and parcel of the Chinese Communist Party's behavior. This is exactly the kind of thing they've done for an awfully long time. And for 50 years, administration after administration turned the other cheek, allowed the Chinese Communist Party to run over America. And our administration didn't do that. We responded. And I think the CCP is hoping that we will have been an anomaly, that we will have been one administration for 4 years that challenged them, that confronted them, that protected the American people. And so I think they wanted to impose sanctions on those individuals who executed our administration's policy and implemented it in a way that will cause anyone else, not just the current administration, but those who come behind, people in business, will say that there's a cost if you challenge China.
Censorship at home and a return to a relaxed approach to our greatest adversary in the world. Buckle your seatbelts, folks. We're only 10 days in to the Biden presidency. Quick break, and then we'll return to analyze just how these first days of Biden and his many executive decrees have gone over with the American people.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So it's clear that those officials mapping out the early days of the Joe Biden presidency have a plan, a detailed game plan on how to roll out initiatives in orderly fashion and limit the public exposure of the new president. And one thing is clear, with a record number of executive orders for such a new president, Biden is given to governing by decree. and will not be put off by how reversible those decrees are by future presidents. But just how popular are the things he has commanded from the Oval Office in these early but revealing days as chief executive? LibertyNation.com managing editor Mark Angelides has been crunching the numbers and putting them under the microscope, and he joins us now. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. So, Mark, which of these decrees, these executive orders in the early days of President Biden stand out as the most and least popular?
It's a bit of a tough choice. In terms of popularity, obviously, you have a difference between what the media finds popular and what the actual American citizens find popular. But media-wise, the one that's really garnering a lot of attention for popularity is the reversal of it wasn't quite a ban on transgender folk in the military, but the reversal of Trump's position on that. That seems to be doing popularly well amongst the media. Quite how it's doing amongst regular Americans, we don't really know. Nobody's really been brave enough to ask that question. But in terms of what is least popular, well, now fortunately we have a lot of polling that can give us an indication on that. So the big three would be the migrant caravans. So of course this ties in with Joe Biden's executive order on deportations, a pause on deportations as part of a larger immigration strategy. So for example, the American people in the polling say that it's by a 2-to-1 margin that voters are opposed to just letting the caravans come over the border. That's 2-to-1 margin, at least without any proper procedures. Or there's the Paris Climate Accord, which gains major plaudits amongst other world leaders, who are all very congratulatory of President Biden for rejoining or making efforts to rejoin. But more than 50%, I think it's 52% of polled Americans think this is going to cost jobs in both the short term and the long term. But possibly the most unpopular and the one with the most immediate effects is the Keystone Pipeline. Here, we're already seeing people in that sector lose jobs, being laid off. And I think for a president that puts the economy as one of the 4 crises that he's looking to deal with, this particular executive order is going to come back and haunt him.
Okay, so here's one thing we could see coming after 2 Trump impeachments. An article of impeachment introduced against Joe Biden in his first week in office.
And this is why we can't have nice things, Tim. This is the exact reason it had to happen. Democrats they've opened the Pandora's impeachment box. So Trump, he's out of office. So the original pleading that Democrat after Democrat stood up in the House to make, that unless President Trump is removed immediately, he will abuse the office and it could be very dangerous. I even heard a tale of Nancy Pelosi worrying about the nuclear codes. But now he's out of office. All this is moot. So they've changed tack to aim at making sure that President Trump can never run again. Now, there's been some heavy-duty constitutional scholars. You've got Jonathan Turley, Alan Dershowitz, who say that impeachment is only for the removal of the president and not to punish. So obviously, with Democrats looking to change the rules here for personal political gain, they've left themselves open to it.
Now, Mark, Democrats worked very hard to gain control of the Senate, and they still control the House, albeit by the slimmest of margins in both chambers. But why do you think, with control of both chambers of Congress, Biden is so focused on temporary executive orders instead of permanent change in the law through legislation?
Let's start with a couple of quotes on that one, shall we, Tim? I'm sure you remember, but in I think it was early 2017, Barack Obama was giving advice secondhand through to President Trump, and he was saying that the use of executive orders it would show that you can't get things done in Congress. So he should use it sparingly, even though, of course, Barack Obama is famous for the phone and the pen. And another one I want to look at is, let's see if you know who this one is. I've got it written down here, actually. I have this strange notion we are a democracy. If you can't get the votes, you can't legislate by executive order unless you're a dictator. We're a democracy. We need consensus. Who was that?
I don't know who that. I'm surprised I don't know, but I don't.
Well, it was a very long time ago in October 2020, and it was Joe Biden. So that was it in one of the debates. Now, granted, he was talking about taxes at the time, but I think the principle still applies. So when he's saying this kind of thing, my best guess is that for all of his promises about being able to work across the aisle, he's afraid of failure. I mean, he's pitched his whole presidential persona on being the guy that could work with the GOP. He could get things done because of his decades of experience in the Senate. And if he's weighed and measured in this and he fails, he's got to be wondering, where does he go from there? So I think that's why he's relying more heavily on executive orders, more so than anybody else by the looks of it.
Thank you for joining us, Mark.
A pleasure, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Mark Angelides, managing editor for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we'll return to discuss what it will take for Joe Biden to do what he so desperately wants to do: erase the legacy of President Donald J. Trump.
Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Mark Angelides, Sarah Cowgill, Tim Donner, and Scott Cosenza, and this is Liberty Nation.
Now let's take a look at the LibertyNation.com electoral leaderboard. It's still 238 for Joe Biden.
What if stories and legends can offer us the key to unraveling the hottest political issues of the day and apply their lessons to understanding the chaos of modern politics?
Impeach 45!
Only where freedom of speech is honored can people who look, sound, or think differently be truly free.
If you're discussing something that's difficult, the probability that you're not going to offend each other is zero.
President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Donald J. Trump is now president.
With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And so it begins for the 46th president, the long, painful process of undoing everything the 45th chief executive did and punishing those who had the audacity to support him. It seems the Democratic Party believes they can boost their own fortunes by continuing their reign of destruction against Trump, the private citizen. Come now, you might say. Surely there must be at least a smattering of reasonable Democrats populating the halls of Congress, like Joe Manchin, for example. The West Virginia senator thought to stand alone as that dinosaur known as a conservative Democrat, sent out an encouraging message to the masses after the election. He would not support radical legislation like Medicare for All or the Green New Deal, and would refuse to cast the deciding vote in favor of such laws in a chamber split 50-50 right down the middle. But then the party establishment evidently impressed upon Senator Manchin that disloyalty to party objectives, in this case, crushing all remnants of Trump and everything he stood for, would not be looked upon favorably by the party leadership. And so Senator Manchin dutifully pivoted in extremis to his new assigned role as a tack dog by declaring that the Senate should consider using a little-known section of the 14th Amendment to remove two GOP senators, Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, for daring to question the Electoral College results. Yes, this one measly Democrat, thought by conservatives to possess some common sense and free market sensibilities, actually thinks it's perfectly legitimate to forcibly remove two of his colleagues from the nation's preeminent legislative body for the most common function of a senator voicing an opinion. So, counting on even an ordinarily level-headed source such as Joe Manchin in the present toxic political climate would amount to a fool's errand. So Biden could go ahead and pass a gaggle of executive orders in the early days of his presidency. Most presidents do, but never as many as the 17 passed down from Biden in his first day in office. And the count is now up above 30, almost all of which are designed exclusively to draw an immediate and striking contrast to his reviled predecessor. Much like pardons, those lovely parting gifts at the end of a presidential term, these executive actions are essentially free introductory gifts for the new occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But you hardly receive lasting credit for something you can do simply with the stroke of a pen, as opposed to working with the legislature to achieve permanent change in the law. These unilateral actions are the very thing Barack Obama employed with regularity once he was neutered by a GOP takeover of Congress, and which he likely lived to regret once Trump simply reversed most all of his controversial orders. With functional control of both chambers of Congress, now that we know Joe Manchin has likely been brought to heel, why exactly is this new chief executive looking to govern by decree? Perhaps this new president was anointed by his party's hierarchy for just this specific task. We can be confident that innovative new policy ideas to be thoughtfully considered by the House and Senate are unlikely to be flowing liberally out of this Oval Office. But if Biden serves the purpose of using his bully pulpit to simply drive home the contrast in personality between him and Trump, steady in tone, signaling his virtue all the way, the congressional and media branch of the party can take care of heralding the wonders of whatever climate change legislation or collectivist cures for the economy are the latest and greatest items on the left's wish list. But with the rancid stench of Trump the person being deodorized by executive fiat in the Biden White House, pay close attention to what happens when the new president and his colleagues begin to unwind what's left, the most broadly popular element of the Trump presidency that would almost certainly have produced a second term but for the pandemic, and that would be the Trump record. Will Biden re-regulate an energy industry radically deregulated by Trump at the cost of lost jobs and higher energy prices? Will he reverse the tax cuts, which represented a landmark achievement of Trump's presidency, meaning a tax increase in the midst of a pandemic? Will he add a public option to the remnants of Obamacare, adding up to yet another tax hike? He's promised to do all of these things, but if he follows through, will he come to rue the day? Then there is those far-reaching progressive measures designed to assure that no one like Trump could possibly ever be elected again, and guaranteeing leftist rule of all three branches of government for as far as the eye can see. Under pressure from radical elements in his party, AOC, Bernie Sanders and company, will Biden support tacitly or explicitly initiatives to add states, abolish the Electoral College, pack the Supreme Court, and or eliminate the Senate filibuster altogether? Get ready for the argument that not only must Trump never be allowed to run for public office again, but the extreme times brought on by this monster require extreme measures. The smart money says the 46th president will have his hands full once the initial days of his presidency are past. And the single factor that landed him in the Oval Office, not being Donald Trump, will start to lose its singular appeal. It's then, and only then, when we will experience the full measure of the Trump presidency and the lasting imprint it's left on the body politic and the country itself. Quick break, and then we're back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty. It's when we're rejoined by our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, and most recently, our man on the ground at the inauguration of Joe Biden. Welcome back, Scott Cosenza.
And the insurrection, Tim. Don't forget
Insurrection
that
as well. You were there for both.
Yes.
We could probably just again share recollections of those, but we won't. Instead, let's talk liberty and the fate of a man's bump stock apparently lies with an on bank, and how great it is that I can use on bank in the first story because I like to show off, with my French, Scott.
Tim, bump stock, Second Amendment, and en banc review in an appellate court. It had to be brought to Liberty Nation Radio. We've talked so much about en banc review in various instances in the past. So, as you'll recall, in a administration, I think that was generally viewed as easy on the Second Amendment and gun rights, and for gun owners, Donald Trump pretty much unilaterally made these devices, these bump stock devices, illegal in a remarkable show of executive authority, if not overreach. And so that's all working its way up through the courts now. This guy is the last person who's been legally allowed to have a bump stock because he's the head of the Utah firearms group that's suing. And so he was allowed to hold on to it while they kind of work things out. And they're still working things out, but unfortunately, it looks like he's going to have to turn in his bump stock for destruction instead of being able to hold on to it.
All right, let's move to the wonderful world of social media, which is shrinking of conservatives more with each day. Alt-right Twitter troll Ricky Vaughn busted for voter disinformation.
Yes, Mr. Vaughn's given name is Mr. Douglas Mackey, and he was arrested by the FBI, Tim, for the creation of memes. And I have to say, as I was reading through the criminal complaint against him, again, this is a criminal prosecution arrest. They were fashioned in a way to make fun of the Hillary Clinton supporters who didn't understand that you had to vote in a prescribed way by law, that you couldn't vote via text message or via Facebook, which is what the joke of the memes were. Now, the FBI takes it as if that was a genuine attempt to kind of frustrate people's attempts to vote rather than make hay of ignorant people or just to amuse folks on the right. He now faces up to 10 years in prison for the alleged crimes.
So, Scott, is there any evidence that this is the leading edge with the camel's nose under the tent of starting to try and shut down people simply for exercising their free speech if they happen to be conservative? Or is that a dramatic overreaction to this individual instance?
I read the complaint and I read the statute, and it seems like a stretch. If it'd be one thing, I think, if there were plenty of prosecutions on hand that we could think of where people who were not Trump allies or defenders were prosecuted thusly. We'll have to see if more reporting bears out whether that's true, but I haven't seen any cases similarly situated yet on the other side of the aisle. So to use a statute that's basically designed to punish kind of barbaric civil rights abuses for tweeting some memes that one created, it doesn't look great, Tim.
Now, the cops have been told down in Florida that and this is much to your delight, they've been told that they must destroy the illegal surveillance videos from that famous spa visited by Robert Kraft, owner of the Patriots and famous billionaire.
Well, politician State Attorney David Arenberg, sort of his last hold on the case was to keep these tapes in the hopes that they would be able to get out. I think is not been established in court, Tim, but I mean, I can read a newspaper as well as anybody. And if you pay attention to this case, you know that it was a political hit job from the jump. And it was designed not to, as the state authorities would have you believe, under the heroic motivations of eliminating or reducing or prosecuting at least trafficking of women or minors, but instead it just involved some humdrum, relatively staid sexual act for money with people well into their approaching their senior years of both parties. And it seemed like Mr. Kraft's affiliation with Mr. Trump led this politician to think that he was going to, make a stand on it and get to higher office. And so Robert Kraft has received the quality of justice that everybody should receive. But unfortunately, it takes, I'd love to see the bill for that defense, Tim, all into now. It has to, run well deep into the seven figures. So for this relatively minor charge, to make sure that his image wasn't shared with the media.
So is his DA from Palm Beach County announced his candidacy for governor yet, Scott?
Oh, I think he's going to maybe wait another cycle, Tim, till the stink hopefully blows off him. Or maybe till Mr. Kraft passes away. I imagine he would be helpful in funding a challenger to that to Mr. Arenberg's office.
I have a few doubts about that now. What the heck is the Jones Act? It's apparently a protectionist measure, and the Biden administration has affirmed their support for it, which apparently is going to harm Hawaiians and Puerto Ricans. Explain it to us.
Yeah, this impacts the liberty of all of us, but especially felt on Americans who live not in the continental United States and on islands. And what it does is it says that if a ship leaves one U.S. port and returns to another U.S. port before stopping at any other ports, that ship must be flagged and sailed by Americans. Now, how the shipping industry works, Tim, is almost all big ships are flagged in, they call them flags of convenience. And basically, it's an easy way for them to use courts to their advantage and not get tied up in crazy regulations that they don't want to. And so almost everything we get that is shipped from China or elsewhere around the world comes with one of these flags of convenience ships. Well, it's a massive increase in prices if you have to require that it's a U.S. ship with and a full U.S. crewed vessel. And so what it means is that people in Puerto Rico and maybe probably the Samoas, Hawaiians, they have to pay a lot more money for goods than they otherwise would, because the only competition for shipping them goods comes from these U.S. vessels and U.S. crews. And it's a real tax that they pay on every single thing they buy that comes by boat, which, as you might imagine, is just about everything.
So that means that Joe Biden is really kind of like Donald Trump. He's protecting Americans, Scott. America first.
It's one of those competing interest things. I'm assuming that the union, the ship with the merchant marine, I guess, or whatever, the shipping unions are more powerful than the Puerto Rican constituency, because that seems to be the only reason why he would do it. They talk about safety all the time and security, but that's a lie, because these foreign vessels come into U.S. ports all the time from foreign ports, just not directly from a U.S. port. So the only reason to keep it is for protectionist purposes. So that's the choice that Biden has made.
And as the nation starts to become widely vaccinated, I guess we're at about 1 million a day now, which is apparently what the new president has set as his goal. It seems that the COVID has disproportionately affected communities of color as the numbers come out. And Oregon, apparently in response to this or for some other reason, is weighing race-based vaccine preferences.
This is from the state's COVID-19 Vaccine Advisory Committee, which the state is not compelled to accept their recommendations, but they've signaled that they are going to accept their recommendations. And I just think it's something to talk about if you have our elected officials, Tim, repeating early and often that it's a racist society, that minorities can't get a fair shake. What's the natural outgrowth of that is we have to have more and more preferential treatments for minorities, down to medical care. Why wouldn't it be the case? And I just think this is a natural, logical extension. It might be rebuffed now or held illegal now, but how far into the future will it be when we see this kind of preferential treatment as well?
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Hi,
I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Mark Angelides, Sarah Cowgill, Tim Donner, and Scott Cosenza, and this is Liberty Nation.
Now let's take a look at the LibertyNation.com electoral leaderboard. It's still 238 for Joe Biden.
What if stories and legends can offer us the key to unraveling the hottest political issues of the day and apply their lessons to understanding the chaos of modern politics?
Impeach 45!
Only where freedom of speech is honored can people who look, sound, or think differently be truly free.
If you're discussing something that's difficult, the probability that you're not going to offend each other is zero.
President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Donald J. Trump is now president.
With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news
And remember, liberty.
today.
All the time and everywhere.
LibertyNation.com.